I'm speaking again with Yasser Munif. He's a professor of sociology at Emerson College in Boston and active with the global campaign of solidarity with the Syrian Revolution. He'll be speaking in Old Lyme, Connecticut on Saturday, January 7th in a program called Syria, We Want Action. And action is what we're going to talk about in this segment. Good evening.
Good evening. Thanks for having me.
Many people have been calling for the UN or the U.S. to do airdrops of food to Syria, to people under siege. Our group's Middle East Crisis Committee, Promoting Enduring Peace here in Connecticut, have called for it. The Democrats have ignored the demand, and Trump, well, he seems to be ready to give Putin a free hand in Syria. Well, what do you think of the demand? Is it a waste of time at this point to appeal to Congress about airdrops of food?
I think it's an important demand, but I think that the UN is very biased. There were a number of different reports showing how colluded they are with the Syrian regime and how much funding they've given to different groups working with the Syrian regime, and how much of the aid is going to the Syrian regime-controlled areas, and only a fragment of it is reaching the opposition. I think it's important to put pressure on Congress and try to have some kind of visibility and send a kind of warning to the UN, but I don't know if it's going to be really effective. I think there are more effective ways to affect change in Syria.
Well, what are some of those more effective ways?
I think that we have to think about the long term. It's clearly a long-term fight or battle in Syria and in the Arab world. And so in the beginning, people in the Arab world were thinking about very short victories and that they will get rid of Arab dictators in matters of weeks and months, and that afterwards we will have democracy and so on. And clearly, almost 6 years later, it became clear that the counter-revolutionary forces, whether they are military or they are fundamentalist or they are part of the old guard and the old regime, are much more powerful than many people have thought. And the opposition, the revolutionaries, were not prepared for that type of long battle. And their political understanding of those very deep structures and the deep state were, I think, very deficient, or they lacked the knowledge or the understanding. And so we need to understand better the counter-revolutionary powers and forces, and we need to build for long-term kind of resistance. We need to build networks, especially for Syrians who are now in many countries in the West and in the global South. So those Syrian communities need to raise awareness about what's happening in Syria and in the Arab world, and they need to build alliances with other Arab diasporas because there is much in common between what's happening in Syria and Saudi Arabia and Egypt and so on. And I don't think that there is a solution in Syria per se. It has to be an Arab solution. Dictatorship is an Arabic or Arab problem to a certain extent, a problem in the Arab region. And so the solution has to be for the entire Arab world. And so we have to think about this question on a larger scale.
Now, have activists had any success? I mean, all these demonstrations and initiatives, maybe I'm being crazy optimistic, but East Aleppo was brutally conquered, but they didn't exterminate the people like the Jews in the Warsaw Ghetto. Do you think it had anything to do with the protests and the worldwide attention that was given to East Aleppo?
I think every time that the Syrian regime used that kind of violence, and the Syrian activists and journalists were able to leak some of the footage and to show what was happening inside Aleppo. Obviously, that got some sympathy, and that generated some kind of protest and movement in different countries. But most of these were really ephemeral, and what we need is more sustainable kind of organizing. And so we need to build strong networks with local activists in different countries. So, for example, here in the U.S., Syrian and Arabs need to forge alliances with Black Lives Matter movement and with the environmentalist movement and feminist movement and so on, because I think there are many things in common. The Arab dictators obviously would not have lasted as long if they didn't have the support of the West, of the U.S., of Europe, and now Russia, clearly. And so we need to build those kind of network and also think about the commonality of our struggles, whether that's racism and the violence of the police here in this country, or the violence against immigrants in Europe, and the commonality between that and how the immigrant population in Europe is treated and perceived as foreigners, or even people of color in Europe are perceived as not belonging and not exactly European, and so on.
What about the prisoners? Can we have some impact on the way the thousands of prisoners are treated in Assad prisons?
I think, again, there is much in common between what prisoners experience in Syria, political prisoners and others, and the situations of prisons in this country. Oftentimes, the Arab world was perceived as a big prison because of dictatorship and the lack of freedom and democracy and so on. And in many ways, that's also the experience of many Black and Latino people in this country. So I think it's very important to think seriously about the linkages and the connections between...
Well, no, I understand about the linkages, but can what we're doing outside of Syria actually put any kind of pressure for better treatment of prisoners in Syria, in Assad's dungeon?
There are a number of different campaigns ongoing right now about that, and that's extremely important. There are people who have been disappeared. There are the political prisoners. There is the whole torture question that's been ongoing for 40 years in Syria. So working on those questions could be extremely productive. Raising awareness, working with human rights organization, and trying to basically denounce and make the conditions of political prisoners in Syria more visible. Recently there was a prisoner strike, and as usual, the Syrian regime ended the strike by massacring many, and that's not necessarily reported. That's not necessarily news in the West and outside Syria. So raising awareness and building campaigns around some of those issues, I think, is extremely important.
Let's end by trying to be positive. Let's say talk about the white helmets. Did you see the coverage on 60 Minutes of the white helmets?
I haven't. No.
Well, I thought it was very good. It was hero worshiping. It wasn't critical in any way, but so what? These guys risked their lives, and guys and women risked their lives, saved tens of thousands of people. And I know it's complete hypocrisy by the ruling class in the U.S. because they don't show anything about Yemen and what the U.S. is doing. These horrible massacres we're doing there, but. The white helmets are great guys. Would you agree?
Right, yeah. And they're doing tremendous work under extremely difficult conditions. And the Syrian regime understood that very, very well. And it launched a massive attack in the media through its anti-imperialist friends who some of them thought it was a good idea to attack and tarnish the image of the white helmets as they were saving lives inside Aleppo. So a number of articles were published during the massive attack of Aleppo, and one wonders if those articles and this attack was coordinated with the Syrian regime through its proxies here and there. So, yeah, again, it's very disappointing to see some people who support Palestine and the Palestinian cause and are anti-Zionist, and yet they support the massacres of the Syrian regime and are willing to play that role of tarnishing anything that's positive coming from Syria.
Did most of these white helmets get out of East Aleppo, or were they killed? Do you know?
It seems that most of the white helmets were removed from Aleppo. So apparently 60% of the residents of East Aleppo moved to the Syrian regime areas, and 40% with all the fighters moved to the Idlib region. So it's not clear where the majority went. I suppose they went to Idlib and other opposition-controlled areas. But I think that there wasn't a massacre of the white helmets.
All right. Well, in these grim times, let's be satisfied a little bit with that positive news. Thank you very much for the interview.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.